Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Plutarch's treatise, How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend, one very important facet of friendship, and also, therefore, of flattery, is what we can call similarity. People have things in common. And we need to understand how this works if we're going to understand how to distinguish the flatterer from a friend. And that can be quite difficult, as the metaphor that Plutarch begins with shows us. So what is it? He begins by talking about wild seeds and wheat, and they've gotten mixed in together, and our goal is to separate them out, to clean the wild seeds out of the bushel of the wheat. And he says, so the wild seeds that have a shape and size that are similar to that of wheat, it's difficult to get them out because they don't pass out through a finer sieve, or they do pass out through a coarser and the wheat along with them. So in a similar manner, right, hutos in Greek, flattery, which blends itself with every emotion, every movement, every need and habit, becomes difficult to separate from friendship. So there's already a double function there. There's imitation, but there's also similarity. Similarity of what? Of pathos, of emotion, of movement, kinema, right? Of need, chreia, and of habit, sunetheon, or of, that can even be translated as intimacy. So the flatterer is going to be difficult to distinguish from the friend. And why is that going to be the case? Well, it has to do with this function of imitation, mimesis. One thing imitates another thing, or a person imitates another person by creating a false similarity, which is kind of also a real similarity. So he says, because friendship is the most pleasant thing in the world, and because nothing else gives greater delight, the flatterer is going to allure by means of pleasure and concern themselves with pleasure. So how are they actually going to do that? By imitation. They try to appear as if they're like us, right? So a little bit later, we're going to find out that what starts a friendship and gets people acquainted with each other and also cements the bonds is this function of likeness, homolia. And it could be likeness in a lot of different manners, as we're going to be looking at. So a little bit later on, he is going to come back to this topic. And he says that the flatterer understands that people are going to take delights in the same things as each other. So what is the beginning, then, of this friendship? Well, similarity of a number of different things. Same habits, ethe, right? And this, by the way, is translated typically into Latin as mores, right? Which is often rendered as like customs or something like that. So don't just think habits in terms of like, stimulus response and doing it over and over again. Think about the things that a person is accustomed to do. Character. Character is a broader category, ethe, right? So this is a person's lasting disposition, the kind of person that they are. And so the flatterer is going to, try to adapt themselves to that. Pursuits, epitedeumata, right? The kinds of things that we're interested in focusing on. So, in ancient times, this probably would not be about, say, fandoms or, occupations of that sort, but there were collectors back then. You could talk to somebody about their collection of things, or, they're interested in chariot racing, and you all are also interested in chariot racing or gladiatorial contests or sipping different kinds of wines. Activities, pragmata. Activities isn't a bad translation because praxe means to do things, but it could also be translated as, affairs or the kinds of matters that we concern ourselves with. And then translated as avocations, diatribae. This is a word that conveys the stuff that we putter around with, hobbies, things we do when we're bored. So the flatterer knows that friendship is, sustained and created by this sort of thing. And he will, pay attention to that. So they see that people take delight. And the word there is actually the word for having joy, chairin, right? They take delight in the same things, and because of that, they find enjoyment and satisfaction in each other as people. So this is how we go from, realizing that we're into the same activities, we see the world the same way, to transferring that good feeling to the person. And so what does the flatterer do? They approach the person who's their target, and they attempt to produce the effect of similarity. They want the other person to think, that person is like me, even if the flatterer isn't. So, there's going to be a lot of examples. He's got this great metaphor. He acts like somebody who goes into a pasture, and by affecting the same, pursuits and interests and manner of life, he gets close to him, rubs up against him so as to take on his coloring until his victim gives him some hold and becomes docile and accustomed to his touch, right? So you're almost like a chameleon, which is another metaphor he will use later on. What is this like? He is disapproving actions and lives and persons he perceives his victim to dislike. Anything that pleases the other, he commends, not with moderation, but to outdo them in amazement and wonder, right? So they're really getting into what the other person gets into. And he says that the flatterer is unlike the friend. The friend actually has a uniform or constant character. They're into the same stuff, right? Whether they're with you or not with you. The flatterer is different. The flatterer is into what you're into precisely because they want to get in good with you, and they're not really that into it, right? I mean, so let's take an example. They see you wearing a band t-shirt, and they'll come up to you, and instead of being a jerk about it and being like, oh, you don't really listen to that band, they'll say, oh, what's your favorite album by that band? Ooh, I like them too. I hear that they're going to go on tour soon. Maybe we would get tickets and go see the show together, right? But really, they don't care about that band. They're just trying to get in with you. People do this, by the way, in romantic relationships an awful lot, and this creates all sorts of problems for them later on because they pretend to like something that the person who they want to be involved with likes, genuinely likes, and then they do get involved, and now they can't reveal that they're not into whatever it is, different kinds of oatmeal, taking bike rides, collecting feathers from parakeets, whatever it would happen to be. So, this is actually quite an interesting issue that arises. So a friend, uniform character. A flatterer is changeable or variable, as he's going to say. Not simple, not one, but variable and many in one. And he's got another great metaphor here, like water that is poured into one receptacle after another, constantly on the move from place to place, changing his shape to fit his receiver. So, he's going to pretend to be interested in, to love and hate things that the target does. And how can we be on guard against this? So it's kind of funny because Plutarch will say the flatterer is basically like an ape. In ancient times, they thought of the apes as an eminently imitative animal, right? They're not as smart as human beings, but they're not like other animals that are primarily driven by their instincts. And, dogs are this way, and lions are this way, and snakes are this way. The ape is a bit more malleable. So he says, the capture of the ape is effected while he's trying to imitate the human being by moving and dancing as the person does. The flatterer leads on and entices others, not imitating all persons alike, but with one he joins in dancing and singing, with another in wrestling and getting covered with dust. If he takes hold of a huntsman fond of the chase, he follows on, and he... if he finds a scholarly and studious young man, he is absorbed in books. His beard grows down to his feet, right? He talks about Plato's numbers. And if he's, finding other groups, then it's wine coolers and glasses, now bursts of laughter. So they're going to be changeable, and that gives you one way to catch them. Watch them when they're not with you. See what they're like when they're with other people who they're also probably going to imitate. They don't have a fixed character, so they're going to try to blend in with other people in ways that are not really similar to you, not really compatible with how they've portrayed themselves to you. But Cicero has an even better technique. He says, lead them on, try them out. He says, the changes of a flatterer can be most easily detected if a person pretends they themselves are very changeable and disproves the mode of life they previously approved and suddenly shows a liking for actions, conduct, or language which used to offend them. What will happen in that case? The flatterer will follow along and say, oh yeah, I'm that way too. I thought that virtue was really important. Now I'm all about drinking wine. And so in a way, it's a little bit, what would you call it? Cynical in the bad sense. You're pretending to be a worse person than you are, but you're doing it so that the flatterer will come along and reveal himself, and so you can catch him. Now, Plutarch is going to make a really important point about friends and similarity or imitation. Friends aren't similar to you in every respect. If they're genuinely good people, they are going to imitate or replicate the things that are actually good, the things that they consider to be good. So, if your friend sees you doing something vicious, say shoplifting from stores, they're not going to say, well, yeah, friends got to share in everything. I guess I'm a shoplifter now because my friend is. They're actually going to be, and we'll talk about this elsewhere, they're going to be like, what is wrong with you? They're going to give you some honest feedback, as we call it. The flatterer is not going to do that. So the friend is going to imitate, as he says, the best things, not everything, but, things that are actually good. They'll share in right conduct, in love for the good, not in error and evil doing, unless they get infected in some way by your doing so. So they're not going to do things like copying Plato's stoop, Aristotle's lisp, and Alexander's twisted neck, as well as the harshness of his voice in conversation. That really doesn't make sense to do that. What about the flatterer? The flatterer is going to imitate the bad things about their target. because they're incapable of making themselves like to another in any quality that's really worthwhile, they will imitate them in bad things. So licentiousness or lustfulness, right? Sexual desire, superstition, passionate anger, harshness towards servants, distrust towards household and kinsmen. And why are they going to do this? Because they're actually a bad person themselves. And so, it's easy for them to imitate badness. It kind of comes naturally to them, whereas goodness is more difficult for them to do that with. And he says that it's very interesting. When it comes to good things and bad things, they are going to exploit this in how they compare themselves to us. So the imitation isn't complete. One person is better than the other. So if they find out that you have certain problems, they'll pretend to have those problems. Here's an example that he gives. If they know that one person is unfortunate in their marriage, they will lament over their own wife, revealing certain secret faults of theirs. The similarity makes the fellow feeling stronger. So they give, a sense of confidence. And, they'll also claim that they're worse than the friend. They'll give their friend first place. You could say, in good things, your friend is even better than me. So I'm a good runner. The other person simply flies. I'm a natural born poet, and I write verse that's not at all bad, but your poetry is amazing. But when it comes to negative qualities, they'll claim that they're worse off. He gives you some examples. If one person is kind of touchy, then they'll call themselves irascible or choleric, or prone to anger. If a person is superstitious, they'll say that they themselves are possessed. If the person says they're in love, they will say they are mad with passion. So we see that the imitation, in order to produce similarity, can take on different modalities in the flatterer's behavior that it won't with the friend. So what does this tell us? How we can, in fact, distinguish these things that are pretty similar in appearance, flattery and genuine friendship, from each other in terms of how the similarities work and what we can observe about whether a person genuinely is similar to us or not.